The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Florence as a young merchant named Lorenzo hurried through the narrow alleyways, his mind racing with the weight of recent revelations. 3 days earlier, he had discovered a collection of worn manuscripts in his late grandfather's study, hidden beneath decades of dust and forgotten correspondence. Among these yellowed pages lay something extraordinary, detailed notes and observations that appeared to be inspired by the political genius of Niccolò Machiavelli himself, written in his grandfather's meticulous hand. Lorenzo had always known his grandfather as a successful trader who had built a modest empire from nothing, but these documents revealed something far more profound. They contained a systematic approach to personal development and success that drew heavily from Machiavellian principles, adapted not for ruling kingdoms, but for mastering one's own destiny in the modern world. As Lorenzo delved deeper into these writings, he began to understand why his grandfather had been so remarkably successful, and why he had always emphasized the importance of self-discipline and focused action. The documents were organized into 3 distinct sections, each building upon the previous one like the foundation stones of a great cathedral. The first section dealt with the fundamental principle of investing in oneself, the second focused on the ruthless elimination of distractions, and the third outlined the strategic application of these principles to achieve lasting power and success. What made these writings particularly compelling was how they wove together Machiavelli's timeless insights with practical, actionable strategies that anyone could implement in their daily life. Part 1, The Foundation of Self-Investment. Lorenzo's grandfather had titled the first section Il Principe di se stesso, the Prince of Oneself. The opening passage immediately captured attention with its bold declaration, every man must become the sovereign of his own domain before he can hope to influence any other. Machiavelli understood that power begins from within, and those who cannot govern themselves will never govern anything of consequence. The manuscript explained that Machiavelli's greatest insight was not merely about political maneuvering, but about the fundamental nature of power itself. True power, the text argued, flows from competence, and competence is built through deliberate, sustained investment in one's own capabilities. The prince had written about the importance of studying war in times of peace, of understanding both the lion and the fox within oneself, and of building strength before needing to use it. These same principles, when applied to personal development, created an unshakable foundation for success. The first principle outlined in the manuscript was virtue through continuous learning. Machiavelli had praised leaders who constantly studied history, learned from both victories and defeats, and adapted their strategies based on new knowledge. Lorenzo's grandfather had applied this by dedicating the first 2 hours of every day to reading and studying subjects directly related to his business and personal growth. But this wasn't casual reading or entertainment, it was strategic knowledge acquisition with specific goals in mind. The manuscript detailed how this learning should be structured. Like a military campaign, it required intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and tactical execution. One should identify the key skills and knowledge areas that would provide the greatest competitive advantage, then systematically acquire expertise in those domains. The text emphasized that this learning must be active, not passive. It required taking notes, asking questions, seeking out mentors, and, most importantly, immediately applying new knowledge in real-world situations. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had maintained detailed learning logs, tracking what he studied, what insights he gained, and how he applied new knowledge to his business decisions. This methodical approach had allowed him to spot market trends before his competitors, understand customer psychology more deeply, and make strategic decisions with confidence. The manuscript noted that knowledge without application is merely entertainment, but applied knowledge becomes power. The second principle was building intellectual and emotional fortezza. Machiavelli had written extensively about the importance of fortifications, physical structures that protected a prince's territory from invasion. The manuscript applied this concept to personal development, arguing that one must build intellectual and emotional fortifications to protect against the inevitable challenges and setbacks of life. Intellectual fortezza involved developing critical thinking skills, learning to analyze situations objectively, and building the mental discipline to make rational decisions even under pressure. The manuscript outlined specific exercises for strengthening these mental muscles, daily reflection and analysis of decisions made, regular devil's advocate sessions where one argued against their own positions, and systematic study of logical fallacies to avoid common thinking errors. Emotional fortezza was equally important.
The text explained that Machiavelli understood emotions could be both a source of strength and a vulnerability. A prince who was ruled by his passions would make poor decisions, but one who completely suppressed his emotions would fail to inspire others or recognize important social cues. The key was developing emotional intelligence and self-control. Lorenzo's grandfather had practiced this through daily meditation and self-examination, asking himself difficult questions about his motivations, fears, and desires. He had also studied the emotional patterns of others, learning to read people's true intentions behind their words and actions. The manuscript contained detailed observations about human nature that rivaled Machiavelli's own insights, noting that most people are predictable once you understand what they truly want and what they truly fear. The third principle was strategic resource accumulation. Machiavelli had emphasized that a wise prince always prepared for future challenges by accumulating resources during times of plenty. This wasn't just about money or military supplies, it included relationships, reputation, skills, and strategic positioning. The manuscript translated this into personal terms, arguing that successful individuals must constantly build multiple forms of capital. The text outlined 5 types of capital that must be systematically developed: financial capital through careful saving and intelligent investing, social capital through building genuine relationships with valuable people, intellectual capital through continuous learning and skill development, reputational capital through consistent delivery of excellent work and ethical behavior, and physical capital through maintaining health and energy. The manuscript emphasized that these forms of capital were interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Good health provided the energy needed for continuous learning. Strong relationships opened doors to new opportunities. A solid reputation attracted better partners and customers. Financial resources provided the freedom to take calculated risks. The key was developing all 5 areas simultaneously rather than focusing on just one. Lorenzo found detailed examples of how his grandfather had applied this principle. He had maintained physical fitness well into his 70s, allowing him to outwork competitors half his age. He had cultivated relationships not just with immediate business contacts, but with people in adjacent industries who might someday provide valuable opportunities or insights. He had invested in his own education even when it seemed unnecessary, learning new languages and technologies that eventually provided unexpected advantages. The manuscript also revealed the importance of what Machiavelli called the long view. Most people made decisions based on immediate circumstances and short-term pressures, but truly successful individuals thought in terms of decades and generations. Every investment in oneself should be evaluated not just for its immediate benefits, but for how it would compound over time. As Lorenzo continued reading, he began to understand why his grandfather had always seemed so calm and confident, even during difficult periods. He had built such strong foundations in all areas of his life that temporary setbacks couldn't shake his fundamental position. Like a well-fortified castle, he could weather storms that would destroy less prepared competitors. The first section concluded with a powerful observation: the man who invests in himself becomes anti-fragile. He not only survives chaos and uncertainty, but actually grows stronger from them. This is the ultimate expression of Machiavellian virtue in personal life. Lorenzo realized that this was exactly what he had observed in his grandfather's character, and it was precisely what he needed to develop in himself. Part 2, The Art of Elimination, Destroying What Weakens You. The second section of his grandfather's manuscript bore the title La guerra contro il tempo perduto, The War Against Lost Time. Lorenzo found this portion even more intense and practical than the first, filled with specific strategies and brutal honesty about the enemies of achievement that most people refuse to acknowledge. The opening passage set a stark tone. Machiavelli understood that a prince's greatest enemies were not always external armies, but internal corruption, divided loyalties, and the slow poison of complacency. In personal life, our greatest enemies are not our competitors, but our own habits, distractions, and the subtle ways we sabotage our own progress. Victory requires not just building strength, but ruthlessly eliminating weakness. Lorenzo's grandfather had identified what he called the 5 deadly drains, categories of activities, relationships, and mental patterns that systematically destroyed one's potential for success. The manuscript detailed each of these with the clinical precision of a military strategist analyzing enemy positions. The first deadly drain was attention scattering.
The manuscript argued that in the modern world, the ability to focus deeply on important tasks had become the ultimate competitive advantage. Most people had unknowingly surrendered this advantage by allowing their attention to be fragmented by countless small interruptions and low-value activities. The text quoted Machiavelli's observation that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done, sooner affects his ruin than his preservation, applying it to the daily choice between important work and trivial distractions. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had conducted what he called attention audits, systematic tracking of how he spent his mental energy throughout each day. The results had been shocking, revealing that even a successful person could lose hours daily to meaningless activities, checking email repeatedly, engaging in pointless conversations, consuming low-quality information, and allowing other people's urgencies to override his own priorities. The manuscript outlined a methodical approach to reclaiming attention. First, one must identify and eliminate attention thieves, activities that consumed mental energy without providing proportional value. This included most social media, most news consumption, most meetings, and most forms of entertainment that served as mere escapism rather than genuine refreshment or education.
The text emphasized that elimination must be absolute, not partial.
A prince cannot be partially loyal to two masters, the manuscript noted, and a person cannot achieve excellence while partially committed to excellence. This meant turning off all notifications except for true emergencies, scheduling specific times for checking messages rather than responding reactively, and creating physical environments that supported deep work rather than shallow activity. The second deadly drain was energy vampires, relationships, and activities that consistently drained energy without providing proportional returns. The manuscript drew heavily from Machiavelli's analysis of advisors and courtiers, noting that a wise prince surrounded himself only with people who contributed to his strength and success, while carefully managing or eliminating relationships that weakened his position. Lorenzo found detailed criteria his grandfather had developed for evaluating relationships. The text distinguished between energy-giving relationships, those that inspired, challenged, supported, and elevated one's thinking, and energy-draining relationships, those characterized by constant complaints, drama, negativity, or demands for time and attention without reciprocal value. The manuscript noted that many people allowed toxic relationships to continue out of misplaced loyalty or fear of conflict, but this was a form of self-sabotage that successful individuals could not afford. The text outlined specific strategies for managing relationship energy. This included setting clear boundaries with energy-draining people, gradually reducing time spent with individuals who consistently pulled one toward mediocrity, and actively cultivating relationships with people who operated at higher levels of achievement and thinking. The manuscript emphasized that this wasn't about being cruel or selfish, but about recognizing that one's relational environment profoundly influenced personal development and success. The third deadly drain was commitment overload. The manuscript explained that most people destroyed their effectiveness by saying yes to too many obligations, spreading their efforts across so many areas that they achieved excellence in none. This principle drew from Machiavelli's military strategy insights about concentrating forces at decisive points rather than dispersing them across multiple fronts. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had developed what he called strategic saying no, a systematic approach to declining opportunities and requests that didn't align with his core objectives. The manuscript contained templates for politely but firmly declining requests, strategies for avoiding commitment pressure in the first place, and methods for regularly auditing existing commitments to identify those that should be eliminated or reduced. The text emphasized that every yes was simultaneously a no to something else, and that successful people protected their time and energy as fiercely as they protected their financial resources. The manuscript noted that the ability to say no gracefully is as important as the ability to say yes enthusiastically, for it determines whether your efforts will be concentrated or dissipated. The fourth deadly drain was mental pollution, the constant consumption of low-quality information, negative news, gossip, and other mental inputs that degraded thinking quality and emotional state. The manuscript compared this to Machiavelli's warnings about mercenary soldiers, noting that relying on unreliable sources of information was just as dangerous as relying on unreliable sources of protection. Lorenzo found that his grandfather had been extremely selective about information consumption, focusing on high-quality sources that provided actionable insights rather than mere entertainment or emotional stimulation. The text outlined specific criteria for evaluating information sources. Did they provide knowledge that could be applied to improve results? Did they enhance understanding of important trends and patterns?
Did they elevate thinking quality rather than appealing to base emotions?
The manuscript detailed a systematic approach to information diet management. This included unsubscribing from all non-essential communications, replacing passive consumption with active learning, and scheduling specific times for information gathering rather than allowing it to intrude throughout the day. The text emphasized that information quality was far more important than quantity, and that a small amount of high-quality information was infinitely more valuable than large amounts of mediocre content. The fifth deadly drain was perfectionism paralysis, the tendency to delay action while seeking perfect conditions, perfect plans, or perfect outcomes. The manuscript noted that Machiavelli had warned against this tendency, emphasizing that successful leaders took action based on available information rather than waiting for certainty. The text explained that perfectionism was often a disguised form of fear of failure, criticism, or judgment. While high standards were essential, they must be balanced with bias toward action and willingness to iterate and improve through experience. The manuscript outlined strategies for overcoming perfectionism, including setting good enough standards for non-critical activities, establishing deadlines that forced action, and viewing initial efforts as experiments rather than final products. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had practiced what he called minimum viable excellence, identifying the level of quality that was necessary for each situation and not exceeding it unless there were specific strategic reasons to do so. This allowed him to complete projects quickly and move on to new opportunities while still maintaining high overall standards.
The second section concluded with what Lorenzo considered the most powerful insight: elimination is not subtraction, it is multiplication.
When you remove the activities, relationships, and mental patterns that drain your energy, you don't simply have more time and attention. You have exponentially more power, because your remaining resources can be focused with laser intensity on what truly matters.
This is how ordinary people achieve extraordinary results.
Part 3, The Strategic Application, Building Your Empire. The final section of the manuscript was titled L'Art della Costruzione del Regno Personale, The Art of Building Your Personal Kingdom. This portion synthesized the principles from the first two sections into a comprehensive strategy for achieving lasting success and influence.
Lorenzo found this section the most complex and sophisticated, reflecting years of careful observation and strategic thinking.
The opening passage immediately established the scope of ambition. Every person has the potential to build their own empire, not of territory and subjects, but of influence, achievement, and legacy. Machiavelli understood that true power comes not from force, but from the systematic application of intelligence, preparation, and strategic action. The person who masters themselves and eliminates their weaknesses becomes capable of achievements that others consider impossible. The manuscript outlined what Lorenzo's grandfather called the architecture of achievement, a systematic framework for translating self-investment and distraction elimination into concrete results. This framework was based on Machiavelli's principles of strategic thinking, but adapted for personal rather than political application. The first element of this architecture was vision crystallization. The text explained that most people failed to achieve significant success because they had only vague ideas about what they wanted to accomplish. Machiavelli had emphasized the importance of clear objectives and strategic planning, noting that a prince without a clear vision would be defeated by circumstances rather than shaping them. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had spent considerable time developing what he called compelling future scenarios, detailed, specific visions of what he wanted to achieve in different areas of his life. These weren't mere wishes or dreams, but carefully constructed goals that were both ambitious enough to inspire sustained effort and specific enough to guide daily decision-making. The manuscript contained examples of these vision statements, and Lorenzo was struck by their clarity and detail. Rather than vague goals like become successful or make money, his grandfather had written precise descriptions of the businesses he wanted to build, the relationships he wanted to develop, the skills he wanted to master, and the impact he wanted to have on others. Each vision was accompanied by specific metrics and timelines, creating accountability and urgency. The text emphasized that vision must be personal and authentic, not borrowed from others or imposed by external expectations. A prince who fights for someone else's kingdom fights with half his heart, the manuscript noted. A person who pursues someone else's definition of success will never achieve their own greatness. The second element was strategic resource deployment. Building on the resource accumulation principles from Part 1, this section outlined how to systematically apply accumulated resources to achieve maximum impact. The manuscript drew from Machiavelli's military strategy insights, particularly his understanding of timing, positioning, and force concentration. Lorenzo found detailed examples of how his grandfather had applied these principles in business and personal life. Rather than spreading his resources evenly across multiple opportunities, he had identified the highest leverage activities and concentrated his efforts there. This often meant saying no to good opportunities in order to say yes to great ones, a principle that required both analytical skill and emotional discipline. The text outlines specific frameworks for resource allocation decisions. These included analyzing the potential return on investment of different activities, considering both immediate and long-term benefits, evaluating the competitive landscape to identify areas where concentrated effort could create significant advantages, and regularly reassessing resource allocation as circumstances changed. The manuscript emphasized that strategic deployment wasn't just about business or career activities, but applied to all areas of life. Time spent on health and fitness was strategic deployment because it provided energy and longevity for other pursuits. Investment in key relationships was strategic deployment because it created opportunities and support systems. Even leisure activities should be chosen strategically, selected for their ability to refresh and inspire rather than merely kill time. The third element was influence architecture. The manuscript explained that lasting success required the ability to influence others not through manipulation or coercion, but through the systematic development of credibility, trustworthiness, and value creation. This drew heavily from Machiavelli's insights about leadership and the balance between being feared and loved. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had studied influence as systematically as he had studied any other business skill. The manuscript contained detailed observations about human psychology, communication patterns, and the subtle ways that influence operated in daily interactions. The text noted that true influence came from consistently providing value to others while maintaining absolute integrity in all dealings. The framework for building influence included several key components. First was the development of genuine expertise in areas that others valued, becoming known as someone who could solve important problems or provide valuable insights. Second was the cultivation of reputation through consistent delivery of promised results and ethical behavior in all circumstances. Third was the strategic sharing of knowledge and resources to help others succeed, creating networks of mutual benefit and loyalty. The manuscript emphasized that influence must be earned through demonstrated competence and character, not claimed through titles or positions. A prince who relies on his crown rather than his capability will lose both, the text observed. A person who expects influence without earning it will find themselves ignored when it matters most. The fourth element was adaptive strategy execution. The text explained that even the best plans required constant adjustment based on changing circumstances and new information. This drew from Machiavelli's understanding that successful leaders combine careful planning with tactical flexibility, adapting their methods while maintaining focus on their core objectives. Lorenzo found that his grandfather had developed sophisticated systems for monitoring progress, identifying problems early, and making strategic adjustments without losing momentum. The manuscript outlined specific practices for strategic review and adaptation, including weekly reflection sessions to assess progress and identify obstacles, monthly strategic reviews to ensure activities remained aligned with goals, quarterly deep dives to reassess major objectives and strategies, and annual comprehensive planning sessions to set direction for the coming year. The text emphasized that adaptation must be disciplined rather than reactive. Change your tactics freely, but change your strategy carefully, the manuscript advised. The person who changes direction with every wind will never reach any destination, but the person who never changes course will crash into obstacles that could have been avoided. The fifth element was legacy construction. The final component of the achievement architecture focused on creating lasting impact that extended beyond immediate personal success. The manuscript noted that Machiavelli had understood the importance of building institutions and systems that would endure beyond any individual leader. Lorenzo discovered that his grandfather had thought carefully about the legacy he wanted to leave, not just in terms of wealth or business success, but in terms of the positive impact he could have on other people and future generations. The manuscript outlined specific strategies for building legacy, including mentoring others to achieve their own success, creating systems and processes that could benefit others long after one's own involvement ended, and documenting knowledge and insights that could help future generations avoid mistakes and accelerate their own development. The text emphasized that legacy construction wasn't something to postpone until later in life, but should be integrated into all activities from the beginning. Every action either builds toward your legacy or detracts from it, the manuscript observed. The person who waits until they have achieved success before thinking about legacy discovers that they have built an empire of sand. As Lorenzo reached the conclusion of the manuscript, he found a final section that tied all the elements together into what his grandfather called the Machiavellian synthesis. This section explained how the principles of self-investment, distraction elimination, and strategic application worked together to create what the text termed anti-fragile success achievement that not only survived challenges and setbacks but actually grew stronger from them. The synthesis emphasized that these principles weren't merely techniques to be applied mechanically, but represented a fundamental approach to life that required constant practice and refinement. Becoming the prince of your own life is not a destination but a journey, the manuscript concluded. It requires the daily choice to invest in yourself, eliminate what weakens you, and apply your resources strategically toward meaningful goals. Those who master this approach don't just achieve success, they become the kind of people who cannot help but succeed. Lorenzo closed the manuscript as the afternoon sun streamed through his grandfather's study windows, feeling as though he had been given a roadmap for his own life. The principles outlined in these pages weren't merely historical curiosities or philosophical abstractions, but practical strategies that had been tested and proven through decades of application. More importantly, they represented a way of thinking about personal development and achievement that was both ambitious and deeply grounded in reality. As he began to plan how he would apply these insights in his own life, Lorenzo understood that he was not just inheriting his grandfather's business knowledge, but his grandfather's approach to life itself, an approach that transformed ordinary individuals into extraordinary achievers through the systematic application of timeless principles. The manuscript had given him more than strategies for success, it had given him a philosophy for living with power, purpose, and lasting impact. The journey from ordinary to extraordinary, Lorenzo realized, began with a single decision, the decision to become the prince of one's own life, ruling oneself with the same strategic intelligence and disciplined execution that Machiavelli had counseled for ruling kingdoms. In the modern world, this was perhaps the most valuable form of power one could possess, the power to shape one's own destiny through the masterful application of intelligence, discipline, and strategic action.